Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. It started with that smell, smoke and antiseptic, bleeding through the cracked window of my car as if someone else was breathing behind me. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened, trying to convince myself it was nothing more than road exhaustion. I'd been driving nearly 12 hours straight across Highway 67 near Interstate 90, heading back to Minnesota after visiting my sister. The highway is a lonely place at night, a long ribbon of semi-headlights, dead radio stations, and the occasional abandoned-looking rest stop that feels more like a mirage than a destination. When the restroom sign appeared through the fog, glowing a tired blue, I almost sobbed with relief. I pulled into the gravel lot and shut the engine off. The fog didn't drift like normal fog. It curled slowly, deliberately, as if it had been waiting for me. And that smell, antiseptic over charred wood, hit me with a strange familiarity, like the way a scent can drag an old memory into the light before your brain catches up. The building didn't match the sign. Instead of a rest stop, it looked like a tiny rural clinic, the kind that should have been swallowed by the 90s along with pagers and wallpaper borders, tan siding, narrow windows, a flickering red exit sign inside. I sat there a minute, debating if this was one of those places truckers warn you not to enter at night, but I was desperate, and everything in me ached to step out, stretch my legs, splash my face with water. So I went in. The fluorescent lights hummed loud enough to vibrate in my jaw. The tiled floor gleamed from a recent mop job, though the rest of the building looked untouched by modern cleaning products. Straight ahead hung a faded curtain, the type used to separate patients. I nearly turned back when I heard heels clicking. Slow, rhythmic, approaching. A woman stepped from behind the curtain wearing a starched white nurse uniform, the kind with pointed shoulders and flat white sneakers. She looked shocked, relieved, almost emotional, as if recognizing someone she'd been waiting years for. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her badge read, Nurse Caldwell. "Oh, thank God, Lena," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. "You made it back." I blinked. Sorry, what?" "You don't have to pretend," she said softly, stepping closer. "You've been through enough already." My pulse thudded in my ears. "I just need directions to a working bathroom." Her face softened with the kind of sympathy people use when trying not to trigger someone unstable. "Honey, you're a patient. You were brought in after the explosion. You don't remember the fire, do you?" Something inside my stomach dropped, cold and deep. "I'm not injured," I said quickly, taking a step back. "I think you're confusing me with someone else." She reached for my arm. Her fingers were shockingly cold, colder than the night fog. "Lena, you're confused. Shock does that. Let's get you settled. I'll give you something to help you rest." She gestured toward an examination bed with yellowed restraints, the leather cracked like old skin. I jerked my arm free. "No, I'm not staying here." The lights flickered, and for a second her expression cracked, something like frustration, but smoother, colder. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Her voice sharpened to clinical neutrality. "Patients don't leave until they're cleared, and you are not cleared." "I'm leaving," I said, forcing confidence I didn't feel. "Lena," she said my name like a reprimand. "People who walked out died in the fire. I won't let that happen to you again." Again. I backed toward the door, heart pounding. She moved fast, faster than someone her age should, blocking me. Her white uniform seemed to glow under the flickering lights. "Let me administer the sedative," she said, lifting an old glass IV bottle. The cloudy liquid inside shifted like something alive. The rubber tubing trembled in her grip. "No," I whispered. "You survived once," she murmured, "but only barely." She raised the bottle higher, like a threat disguised as mercy. "Let me help you." My throat tightened with the metallic taste of adrenaline. "I'm not your patient." Her smile thinned. "You're all my patients." The hallway behind her shimmered, a rippling heat haze, like watching a building burn from the inside out. A faint crackling sound rose from somewhere unseen. My eyes watered. "I'm leaving," I croaked. "You already tried," she said calmly. "You just don't remember." Something snapped inside me. I shoved past her with both hands, surprising us both. She staggered. The glass 4 bottle hit the tile and shattered, sounding like a gunshot. I sprinted toward the exit, pushing the heavy door so hard it slammed against the outside wall. Cold air slapped me, but the moment my feet hit gravel, everything went wrong. Because the clinic, this whole place, was gone. Behind me stood nothing but a burned concrete slab, half buried in weeds, charred black in places as if the building had collapsed long ago. No walls, no roof, no lights. The fog thinned just enough for moonlight to trace the broken outline of foundation walls. I whipped around, expecting the door to still be behind me, but there was nothing but the empty lot and the wind. I stumbled backward toward my car, trying to get my vision to make sense of what I was seeing. My breath shook. My fingers stung from the cold. I locked myself inside and didn't move for an hour. At some point, my eyes burned from crying, and the exhaustion smothered me like a heavy blanket. I told myself I needed sleep, that hallucinations can happen when you're overtired. I thought that if I just closed my eyes, everything would be normal in the morning. I remember drifting off with the smell of smoke and antiseptic clinging to the air, as if it had seeped into my vents. I woke to sunlight and silence, startled by the weight pressing into my wrist. At first I thought I'd slept on my hand wrong, but when I lifted my arm, I froze. A hospital band circled my wrist, faded plastic, half-melted edges, ink smudged by time. The date printed on it screamed through my skull like a siren. October 12th, 1994. Mass casualty admission. My breath hitched. I tore at the band until the brittle plastic cracked. It came off in pieces, leaving faint ridges around my skin. I threw it on the passenger seat like it might bite me. "Okay," I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. "Someone put it on me while I slept. That's all. Someone messed with me. Someone..." But no one was there. No tire tracks except mine. No clinic. No footprints in the gravel. No signs anyone had been near my car. I drove away shaking, gripping the wheel tight enough to bruise my palms. I told myself I'd stop at the next town, file a police report, get a hotel, take a shower, try to scrub the night off my skin. But 50 miles later, when I pulled into a gas station, the smell hit me again. Smoke and antiseptic, faint but unmistakable. My stomach lurched. I backed out without filling up. The next night at home, I lay in bed trying to breathe normally. My bedroom was quiet, familiar, safe. But the moment I turned off the light, the air changed. It grew heavier, warmer. A soft hiss filled the darkness, like water hitting hot metal. I sat up. "No," I whispered to no one. "You're tired. You need sleep." But then I caught it. The faintest shimmer at the corner of my vision. Like heat distortion. Like a hallway burning. My body went cold. I turned on every light in my apartment and stayed awake till dawn. The next night was worse. The smell seeped through the vents again, faint but steady. I taped them shut. I ran the bathroom fan. I opened windows despite the cold. Nothing helped. 2 nights later, I woke to the soft click of heels in my hallway. My heart nearly stopped. I sat up slowly, barely breathing. The sound came again, measured, slow, confident. Heels on tile, though my apartment doesn't have tile floors. I whispered, "Nurse Caldwell?" Silence answered. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text. Unknown number. Are you ready for your second admission? I dropped the phone. My whole body shook as I backed into the corner of my bed, waiting for the sound of heels again. They didn't come. Instead came a faint drip, then another, then another. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, and walked toward the bathroom. The door was cracked open. Light off. The smell hit me as soon as I touched the knob. Soot and disinfectant. Thick and wrong. I pushed the door slowly. Blackened water dripped from the ceiling vent, splattering the sink like old blood diluted with bleach. The mirror was fogged, though the room wasn't warm. A single word was smeared across the glass in wet soot. Again. I stumbled back, gasping. Something shifted behind me. A presence, or maybe the air, bending around an unseen figure. My vision flickered. For a second, I swear I saw the clinic walls around me, the exam bed, the yellow restraints. Then it was gone. I left the apartment that night and drove until sunrise, staying on the road even when my eyes blurred. Every mile that smell clung to me. Every rest stop, every gas station, every turn, it followed. I checked my wrist constantly, terrified I'd look down and see another band. A week passed. I tried hotels, motels, friends' couches. It didn't matter. The smell found me every night, sometimes faint, sometimes strong enough to sting my eyes. Sometimes I swear I feel her cold fingers brush my arm as I'm about to fall asleep. I visited the burned clinic site again yesterday. I don't know why. Maybe part of me needed to see if the slab was still empty, if reality still held. It didn't, because the slab wasn't empty. A single IV bottle sat in the center, upright despite the wind, glass uncracked, filled with cloudy liquid that churned as if it had been waiting. A hospital band lay beside it. This one had my name printed on it already. I backed away so fast I nearly fell into the weeds. When I reached my car door, something whispered behind me. Soft, familiar, patient. You survived once, Lena. Let me help you again. I slammed into my car, locked the doors, sped away until the slab vanished behind the rise of the road. Tonight, I'm writing this from a rest stop hundreds of miles away. The vents are covered. The windows are cracked. The radio is on. The lights are all turned up. But the smell, that smell, is back. Faint at first, then stronger, as if someone just opened a door in a burning room. There's a soft sound outside my car. Heels. Clicking on gravel. Getting closer. I won't look. I know who's out there. And I know she'll keep coming until I go back. I was 9 years old when I learned that fear can make a grown woman lie with a straight face, even to her own daughter. It started under the humming fluorescence of Quick Wash 24/7 on Crossridge Avenue, where my mother, Denise, folded towels in a rhythm that tried too hard to be calm. Rain hammered the glass like it wanted in. The detergent smell was warm and clean, but beneath it clung this faint metallic sharpness, like cold pennies after someone's held them too tight. I noticed it because Mom had gone silent in that soft, controlled way that meant she was terrified. She kept glancing over my shoulder. Not directly, never directly, but in these tiny, jerky movements as if she were checking the same spot again and again, hoping it would be empty the second time. I pretended I didn't know. At 9, you think pretending not to see something will keep it from seeing you. But I saw him. A tall man, too still, too focused, standing in the corner by the vending machine. He held a newspaper he never turned. The flickering light above him carved deep shadows into his face so I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them, like two nails pressed gently into the back of my neck. Mom whispered, "Stay close, Marcy." Her hand grazed my arm, cold and damp with sweat. When she finally said we were done and ushered me toward the door, relief washed over me. Until I saw him again outside, leaning against the streetlight as if he'd been waiting for us to leave. The rain dripped off the brim of his cap, forming a tiny shimmering arc around his boots. He wasn't smoking or checking his phone or doing anything natural, just standing, watching. Mom's whole body went rigid. "Get in the car," she breathed. Not a shout, a plea. I obeyed. The air smelled like wet asphalt and the sour chemical smell of the laundromat drifting after us. I buckled, hands shaking. Mom reached for her door and stopped. Her breath hitched. I followed her gaze. He was walking toward us. She fumbled with the lock, her fingers slipping. The door jerked open before she could close it. I heard her scream, sharp and animal, cut clean in half by a heavy thud. The world went black as if someone pulled the plug on the sky. I woke to red and blue lights reflected in the puddles, officers talking too loudly, rain soaking through the blanket someone had wrapped around me. Mom sat on a stretcher, eyes unfocused, hair plastered to her forehead. She kept saying, "It was a mugging. I don't know what he looked like. It was just a mugging." But she was lying. I knew because when I told her I'd seen his face, really seen it. She flinched so hard the EMT thought she was in pain. She shook her head violently, whispering, "No, no, no, Marcy, don't say that again." After that night, silence became law in our house. When I mentioned seeing him at the school fence, Mom grounded me. When I told her he'd been across from the church during Sunday service, she slapped the table so hard the silverware jumped. When I cried because I'd seen him sitting at the back of bus 43, even though he never got on, she sent me to bed before sunset and locked my window from the outside. By 11, I'd learned two things. 1, Mom was somehow more afraid of me talking than of him watching. 2, fear, if you feed it long enough, grows into a shadow with its own shape. For years I saw him randomly, then constantly. At 15, I saw him near the grocery store entrance, head turned just slightly toward me. At 19, I saw him leaning against a bus stop at midnight, face obscured but posture unmistakable. At 22, I woke from a nightmare and swore I saw a silhouette standing by the street lamp outside my dorm. Every time he vanished when someone else tried to look. Every time, the sighting felt like a reminder. I hadn't imagined quick wash. He was real, and he came back. But I said nothing. I stayed silent the way Mom taught me, by making myself small, swallowable, unremarkable. At 32, after years of pretending I'd outgrown the fear, it happened again. I was carrying groceries up the stairs to my apartment, the plastic bags cutting into my fingers when I felt it, a stillness behind the city noise, a presence thickening the air. I turned. Across the street, under a dead streetlight, a man stood perfectly still. Tall, lean, face half hidden by his coat collar. The angle of his head struck some dormant, corrosive memory that my body recognized before my mind did. My knees buckled. I grabbed the railing. He didn't move, not an inch. I blinked once, and he was gone. Not walked away, not blended into a crowd. Gone. That night, I drove to Mom's house because I couldn't hold the fear on my own anymore. Something in me, the part that never stopped being 9, needed answers. Mom answered the door with a wary smile, the kind she used whenever she sensed I wasn't okay. Her living room still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books, like childhood safety bottled up in stale air. I sat on the couch, hands knotted. "Mom," I said, and my voice cracked more than I wanted. "Why did you pretend it was a mugging? Why won't you talk about him?" Her whole body froze. I watched something in her face collapse, like a building losing its frame. She sat slowly, hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. For a long moment she said nothing. Then her voice, thin and hollow, whispered, "He wasn't a mugger, Marcy." Cold rushed through me. "He'd been following me for weeks," she continued, staring past me as if the memory flickered somewhere behind my shoulder. "I tried to pretend he wasn't there, pretend I imagined it. But that night, When he hit me, he leaned down and said, "I'll come back for the girl." I felt everything in me recoil. "Mom." "What?" "I stayed silent to protect you," she whispered. "I thought if we pretended he didn't exist, maybe he'd forget. But he didn't." I didn't tell her why I was asking. I didn't tell her he'd found me again. And I definitely didn't tell her that last night he was closer. I barely slept after leaving Mom's. The apartment felt wrong. Too quiet. Too hollow. Like it wanted to listen to my breathing and memorize it. I kept imagining footsteps in the hall. The soft whine of my bedroom door just barely shifting. The subtle pressure of someone leaning against the other side of the wall. Fear makes silence sound like shouting. I sat on the edge of my bed until sunrise, the sky turning this washed-out gray that made everything look sick. When I finally dragged myself to the shower, the water smelled faintly like metal. My mind jumped instantly to that childhood memory. Cold pennies, sweaty palms, the chemical sting of laundromat air. And my stomach flipped. I turned off the water halfway through. I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. For the next 3 days, I went to work, went home, locked every window twice, and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. But every night, the same pattern repeated. Standing by the window, lights off, staring at the street across from my building like I could will him into staying away. The fourth night, I saw him again. He stood directly under my building's awning lights, close enough that I should have clearly seen his face, but it stayed blurred in shadow, like the darkness clung to him even where it shouldn't. My throat closed. My fingers went numb. I backed away from the window so fast I knocked over a lamp. I didn't call the police. What would I say? "Hi, there's a man who's been watching me since I was 9, but he disappears whenever anyone else looks." I called Mom instead. I hated myself for doing it because she was already fragile, but I needed someone to hear the tremor in my voice. She answered on the third ring. "Marcy?" I didn't speak. I couldn't. After a few seconds, she said, almost in a whisper, "Is he back?" The words split me open. I hung up. Not out of cruelty, out of panic. Because admitting it out loud made it real in a way my body wasn't ready for. That night, sleep wasn't an option. I left every light on, sat on the couch with my back against the wall, hugged a blanket around my shoulders. My heart had this dull, aching throb like it was bruising itself against my ribs. Around 3:12 a.m., the hallway outside my apartment went completely silent. Not normal night silence, this thick, pressing stillness that smothered every sound. My ceiling fan seemed to slow. The refrigerator hum dipped. Even the distant traffic faded into nothing. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate step, right outside my door. I froze. Another step. The shadow under the door moved slightly, not enough to reveal a shape, just enough to prove someone was standing there. I held my breath until my lungs screamed. The doorknob twitched. Just once. Just enough to send adrenaline shooting through me so violently I had to press both hands over my mouth to keep from gasping. The person outside didn't knock, didn't jiggle the knob again, just stood there, listening. A minute passed, or an hour. Time bowed under the weight of fear. Then another sound. So quiet I wasn't sure I'd really heard it. A whisper. Low. Male. Close enough to the door that the wood muffled it into a murmur. I leaned forward an inch, just enough to catch a piece of it. "You were easier to find this time." My body locked up so hard it hurt. The whisper stopped. No footsteps, no retreat, just absence. A vacuum where someone had been moments ago. I didn't move again until dawn light seeped under the doorframe. That morning I packed a duffel bag and drove to a motel 2 towns over. A cheap one with loud traffic and thinner walls and bright neon lights that didn't allow shadows to gather the way they did in my apartment. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, shaking, telling myself I was safer here, that he didn't know where I was, but the truth was hollowing me out. If he'd found me across cities, across decades, across silence, what difference would a cheap motel make? I turned the TV on just for noise. The screen flickered an old sitcom rerun, laugh track echoing awkwardly in the dim room. The smell of stale cigarettes stuck to the curtains. My chest tightened. I reached for my phone. Mom had texted twice, then called once. Her last message, "Please come home. I think we need to talk." I stared at it for a long time. There was something in her words, not urgency, but resignation, like she already knew something I didn't. When I finally opened the motel door to leave, the parking lot was empty, almost empty. Across the street, under the shadow of the overpass, a tall figure stood still, head tilted, shoulders squared toward me like he'd been waiting quietly for me to step outside. My blood thinned to ice. The world tunneled. He didn't move, but I felt the weight of his attention pinning me from across the asphalt. I stepped back inside and locked the door. I didn't look out the window again. Now it's been hours. The motel clock ticks too loudly. The lights buzz like they're struggling to stay alive. My phone keeps vibrating. Mom calling, then stopping, then calling again. I should answer. I should run. I should do something. But all I can do is sit on this bed and listen to the hallway outside my door. It's quiet now. Too quiet. And I swear I hear breathing. Not mine. Not next door. Right outside. Slow. Patient. Like someone who's waited a very, very long time. I don't need to open the door to know who it is. I've always known. He came back for the girl, and he finally found me. The night the storm swallowed our house, I learned what it sounds like when something cold is already waiting inside. I didn't know it at 10, but I feel it now. 24, 3 states away, and still waking to the memory of that first thud upstairs, deep and dull, like a boot dropping on old hardwood. Back then, I tried to tell myself it was the wind. Kids cling to whatever lie helps them fall asleep, but even then, it didn't feel like wind. It felt like a presence shifting its weight. My name is Toby Lynn, though no one calls me that anymore. Back then, it was just Toby, the name my dad used in that voice he reserved for storms, calm but stretched thin. That Halloween was supposed to be fun, even with the blizzard looming over Crestview. But by late afternoon, the world turned white, and the drifts rose taller than our porch rail. The sky pressed down, the house groaned, and the power flickered like a dying pulse. Inside, our little blue house on 114 Oak Bend Lane smelled like wet mittens, pine cleaner, and the faint metallic tang of cold air sneaking in through old window frames. I remember sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, hugging a throw blanket that felt too thin, listening to my parents argue quietly behind me. They weren't mad at each other, they were scared. Dad kept checking the generator in the mudroom, muttering under his breath. Mom kept lighting candles and blowing them out again, nervous energy with no place to land. That's when the first thud came from upstairs. Heavy, rhythmic, not the creaking of pipes or the thump of branches. Something deliberate. Something placed. Mom froze halfway through folding a blanket. "Did you hear?" "Pipes," Dad said too fast. "It's an old house, Em." But I saw the look they exchanged. Wide, alert, stretched with the kind of fear adults never admit to kids. I tried focusing on the flicker of the TV, though the channels were cutting in and out. Every once in a while the picture froze on something uncanny, half a cartoon face, a glitchy commercial, static that almost sounded like breathing. The storm made every background noise feel charged, too full, like the house had lungs of its own. Then, around 9:14 p.m., the back door drifted open with this long, tired groan. Snow gusted inside, swirling across the tile like ghosts dragging their hems. Dad jumped up with a curse. "I locked that. I know I locked that." Mom's voice was shaking. Maybe the latch didn't catch. He checked everything. The deadbolt, the windows, even looked behind the coats like he expected someone to be hiding under them. "Wind," he said again. "Just the damn wind." But the wind doesn't make soft footsteps across the upstairs hallway. The kind that pause, then continue. The kind that sound like someone pacing while thinking. I remember whispering, "Dad, someone's up there." He didn't answer me. He didn't want to lie, and admitting the truth would have snapped something inside him he needed to protect. Mom called the police. They said the roads were blocked, the power lines down. Help was coming eventually. That word still gives me chills. It didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like abandonment. Hours passed. The storm pressed harder. The hallway lights flickered and died, then returned, weaker. Every now and then I swore I heard something brushing the stair railing, like fingers trailing it slowly. We made our beds on the living room floor, me between my parents, their bodies tight with some tension I didn't understand. Dad kept a fireplace poker next to him, though he insisted it was just to stoke the fire in case the wood shifts. But close to midnight, the real terror came. I woke to the sound of a click, bright and crisp, my bedroom closet light snapping on. I wasn't in the room, but I knew that sound. Closet lights have a specific timbre, a tiny echo inside the hollow space. "Mom," I whispered. "My light. Someone turned my light on." Mom blinked awake, confused, then terrified as the glow from upstairs spilled faintly down the stairwell. Before I could think, I heard it. A thin, polite voice whispering from my room, "It's cold. Can I come in now?" My scream tore through the house. Dad leaped up with the poker and ran halfway up the stairs before Mom grabbed him, begging him not to go, begging him to wait until daylight. He froze there, caught between fear and duty, and for a moment I thought he might collapse. He didn't go. None of us did. We huddled by the fading fire, listening to the house breathe around us. Something moved upstairs, soft, dragging, punctuated by uneven taps. When the storm finally quieted, dawn pushed pale light through the windows. The house felt drained, like whatever had occupied it most of the night had retreated to some hiding place. Dad went up first. After a long silence, he called down that the closet was empty. No footprints, no signs. But there was a wet puddle on the closet floor, shaped like something had stood there dripping, melting. Not spill, not condensation. A shape, a presence. I remember Mom whispering, trembling, "There's something wrong with this house." But the worst part came when I approached my bedroom window. Outside, beneath a fresh sweep of snow, were tiny boot prints leading straight to my window, but none leading away. As if someone had walked to the house, climbed up into my room, and never left. I didn't sleep the rest of the day. That night, when the sky cleared enough to show a cold blue moon, I heard it again, a soft, deliberate thump at the foot of my bed. I snapped upright. And there, placed neatly on the rug as though someone had just stepped out of them, were two small boots, soaked and dripping meltwater. Not mine. Not old. Not dusty from the attic. Fresh. Wet. Mom screamed. Dad dropped the boots on the porch and locked the door behind them, but I could hear him pacing after, whispering, "This isn't possible. This isn't possible." But it was, and it wasn't over. Even now, years later, I swear winter storms carry the same cold voice curling up from memory. "It's cold. Can I come in now?" And every time, I feel the boots. I feel them settling at the foot of my adult bed, even though nothing is ever there when the light snaps on. Not yet. But the night it finally returned didn't happen in that house. It happened here, where I thought I was safe. I moved across the country at 19, determined to outrun the past. College didn't do much for my nerves. Jumpy people don't thrive in dorms, but distance gave me a thin illusion of safety. I avoided snow states. I avoided old houses. I avoided closets without motion sensor lights. Still, I never fully shook the feeling of being watched whenever the temperature dropped. My friends joked I got haunted house eyes. I laughed it off because adults are supposed to pretend nothing follows them. But last winter, something cracked. The forecast predicted the biggest storm in a decade. I bought batteries, filled the tub, lit the candles, did everything Mom used to do. My apartment smelled like lavender, cleaner, and melting snow off my boots. I tried watching TV, but old habits die too hard. The flickers in the corner of the screen kept pulling my eye like someone stood just out of frame. Around 10 p.m., the storm hit full force. The wind shoved against my windows, rattling them in their frames. My heater groaned. The lights dimmed. That's when I heard the softest tap at my bedroom door. Not a knock. A tap. Like knuckles brushing wood. My heart climbed into my throat. Hello? No. Answer. I grabbed my phone. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. I walked to the door slowly, breath catching at every creak. When I opened it, the hallway was empty. Too empty. My apartment isn't big, there's nowhere to hide. But something felt wrong with the air. Heavy, damp, cold enough to sting my nose. My heat was running full blast, there was no reason for it. I shut the door fast, sat on the bed, tried to breathe normally. Then I heard it. The closet click. That tiny, unmistakable snap of a switch inside a confined space. The light inside my closet blazed through the thin seam of the doorframe. My throat closed. I felt 10 years old again, frozen on a living room floor with snow drifting under the back door. I whispered, "No, no, you're not real." And then, from the closet, soft, polite, achingly, familiar, "It's cold. Can I come in now?" Not. I couldn't scream this time. My body refused. My voice was trapped somewhere below my ribs, locked behind old memories. The doorknob trembled, just once, like a child too shy to turn it all the way. I backed up against the wall, my breath fogged in the air, inside my own apartment, in California. Slowly, painfully slowly, the closet door inched open. An inch, two, then stopped. Silence. Then a single wet drop hit the floor. Then another. Then two more, steady, rhythmic, like meltwater dripping off something that had walked through a storm. I ran. I don't remember grabbing anything, just my keys, my boots half on, my coat unzipped. I drove to a friend's place, shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. I told her I had a panic attack. She believed me, because the alternative is the kind of truth no one wants. The next morning, when I returned, the closet door was wide open, and on the rug, perfectly aligned, were those same two small boots, dripping, facing me. I threw them out. I scrubbed the floor. I burned sage because someone online said it might help. I did everything except admit the truth. Whatever came to my house at 10 never left. It followed me. This winter, it escalated again. 3 nights ago, the storm hit early. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when my phone buzzed with an alert. Temperature drop freeze warning. The moment I read it, the room chilled, not subtle, a rushing cold, as though a window had shattered. My breath fogged instantly, my skin prickled. And then, I heard it. That same polite child's voice, no longer muffled by doors or rooms or distance, but close, too close, right beside my bed. "I'm cold. Let me in." Something pressed against the mattress near my feet, a weight, light, but real enough to shift the blankets. I couldn't move, couldn't think. The air smelled like wet wool and snow, a scent I hadn't breathed since that night in Crestview. When I forced myself to look, no one was there. But the blankets were indented. Small. Foot-shaped. Last night, I set up a camera not to catch anything paranormal, but to prove to myself nothing was happening, that I was spiraling. That trauma was rewiring my brain. This morning, the recording was corrupted, not deleted, corrupted, static, white noise, a faint child's whisper, layered under it, like a second audio track. I replayed it 10 times. On the 11th, I heard it clearly. You let me in, once. My hands won't stop shaking as I write this. I don't know why I'm writing. Maybe because telling the story feels like the only way to stay sane. Maybe because part of me hopes acknowledging it will make it lose power. It doesn't. The boots are here again tonight. I found them by the front door this time, soaked and dripping onto my welcome mat. They weren't there an hour earlier. I checked. I know, I checked. Now I'm sitting on my bed with the lights on, listening to the storm build. My apartment feels too small, the air too cold, the walls too thin to keep anything out. The hallway light flickers as I finish this sentence. And from the closet, a soft, polite whisper that curls through the dark like breath on glass. It's warmer now. Can I come all the way in? In there, warmer? Come on, warmer. Carrie. I don't answer. I don't breathe. But the closet door is opening anyway. And the boots are no longer by the door. They're right beside my bed, waiting. I knew something was wrong the moment the forest went quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get on a cold Oregon morning, but a heavy, watchful stillness that settled over my fifth graders like a hand pressing down on their small shoulders. My name is Miss Bennett, and I've taken dozens of classes on outdoor field trips, but Blackwood Reserve outside Whispering Pines was the first place that ever made me feel observed. The air tasted metallic when we stepped off the bus, a faint tang like blood on a bitten tongue. Frost clung to the pine needles in thin, glassy strands. Even the kids, usually wild with energy at the thought of skipping math for the woods, kept close to me, as if the trees were listening. Ranger Cole, tall, soft-voiced. The kind of man who'd make an incredible audiobook narrator, gave us the usual safety talk, but one line stuck. Stay, near the orange trail markers. If they disappear, turn around immediately. He said it like a warning he'd given too many times, but never loudly enough for the forest itself to hear. I laughed it off then. I shouldn't have. We started the hike, mid-morning. Fifth graders love to wander, tugging each other's jackets, whispering about squirrels and ghosts, but even they fell into a strange rhythm, walking in clusters instead of stretching into the usual loose line. I kept doing head counts. 23, always 23. The number echoed in my mind, like a fragile thing that could change if I didn't guard it. Every few minutes, I'd catch the kids glancing deeper into the trees, toward patches of shadow where the light didn't bend naturally. It wasn't fear exactly, it was recognition, like they sensed something familiar in the darkness but couldn't articulate why. Around noon, something shifted. It started with a crack behind us, sharp and clean, like a branch snapping under deliberate pressure. All 23 heads turned at once. Even the wind stopped threading through the trees. I felt the hairs on my arms lift under my jacket. Probably just a deer, I said. Nothing to worry about. But even as I spoke, I noticed the orange markers were gone. Vanished, not gradually, not overlooked, gone. One moment bright squares lined the trail every few trees. The next, they were erased, as if someone had walked ahead of us, peeling them away. My mouth went dry. Ranger Cole's warning replayed in my mind, this time colder. Miss Bennett, Lily whispered, gripping my hand. The pressure of her small fingers grounded me, but only barely. I scanned the trail behind us, empty. Ahead, endless pines. The light dimmed without the sun moving. My breath clouded in front of me. Okay, everyone, I said quietly. We're turning back. They didn't argue. When kids don't argue, something's wrong. We started moving as a tight cluster, crunching leaves, small shoes, scraping rocks, harsh breathing. Then, a sound cut through the air. A child's, sobbing. Lily's hand jerked in mine. "I think that's Emma," she whispered. Emma stood on my left, her freckles stark against her pale skin. She stared at the sound with wide eyes. That's not me." The crying shifted, first louder, then muffled, as if someone pressed a hand over a mouth. Then a giggle bloomed through the trees. High, breathy, wrong. The kids pressed against me. Something moved above. Slow, heavy. Branches rustled, but not in a wind pattern. More like something rearranging itself limb by limb. I looked up. There was a silhouette perched in the canopy. Slender, long, bent in anatomically impossible ways. Its joints positioned like someone had assembled a human shape from memory and gotten it almost right. Its knees tucked backwards. Its fingers too numerous, dangling like thin roots. Then it spoke. "Miss Bennett, help me." My name stretched like elastic pulled across teeth. Every child screamed. Something in my chest lurched, not at the sound, but at the timing. The thing was a beat late, mimicking the tremble of my breath, the sharp inhale I'd taken. "Run," I whispered, and the forest swallowed the word. We fled. Branches clawed at our jackets, and leaves whipped past as we tore through a direction I prayed was toward the entrance. The sound behind us wasn't footsteps exactly, it was imitation, echoes delayed by a heartbeat. Our gasps repeated, our footfalls traced like someone learning our rhythm as we made it. A twig snapped directly behind me, too close, too perfect. Then Lily screamed, "It's copying us." I didn't look back. Looking back felt like an invitation. The clearing appeared between the pines like an opening mouth. Ranger Cole stood there, pale, wide-eyed, aiming a radio toward his ear. "I heard all of you," he stammered, as the kids collapsed around him, panting. But from different directions, I heard voices calling my name. Your names. Crying, laughing everywhere. My lungs burned, but I managed. "We need to leave. Now." The bus ride home was silent, dead silent. Kids stared out the windows, eyes glassy, as if expecting to see a dark shape skating between the trees. I sat at the front, hands trembling so badly I tucked them under my thighs. When we returned to school, parents gathered their children wordlessly, pulling them close. I couldn't tell them the truth, it sounded insane even in my mind. So I just said we got lost briefly. No mention of what cried, giggled, and whispered my name. It wasn't until I got home that night after my shower, after pacing my apartment with every light on, that I found it. A piece of paper wedged deep inside my backpack, crushed slightly beneath my lunchbox. I didn't recognize the handwriting. It was a drawing. Crayons, childlike strokes. It showed 23 kids lying face down among tall pines. In the background stood a tall, crooked shadow, arms branched like broken limbs, and its face wore my smile. At the bottom, in shaky letters, "Practice makes perfect." I stared at it until the lines seemed to move. Something wasn't right. Something was incomplete. It took me nearly a minute to realize. The drawing had 24 figures lying in the grass. Not 23. 24. An extra child we hadn't brought. Or something that counted itself among them. I tried to sleep that night. I didn't. I left the drawing on my kitchen table and walked to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. When I lifted my head, I froze. From the living room, faintly, a soft, high giggle, a beat late. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. The bathroom mirror reflected the doorway behind me, but it showed nothing except the edge of my couch and the yellow lamp I always left on overnight. Still, the air had shifted the way air shifts when someone enters a room quietly. My pulse accelerated hard enough to make my vision blur. "Not real," I whispered. "You're tired. You've had a long day. You're imagining it." But I wasn't imagining the cold that slid over the back of my neck. A thin, deliberate chill, as if someone exhaled silently inches from my skin. I forced myself to turn. The living room was empty. but the drawing on the table had moved. Just a few inches, but I remembered exactly where it had been. I'd dropped it near the salt shaker. Now, it sat at the center of the table, aligned perfectly with the wood grain, as though someone had carefully positioned it for me to notice. My throat tightened. I approached it slowly, each step scraping the floor like I weighed twice as much. When I reached the table, I saw new marks. Someone had added to the drawing. A small black X over one of the figures, the one closest to the shadow, and above it, the same shaky letters. Almost perfect. I backed away, stumbling into the counter. My hands shook so hard I dropped my keys, didn't even realize I'd been holding them. Then, knocking. 3 soft taps on my window. My apartment is on the second floor. The blinds rattled faintly, like someone brushed them with the back of their hand. I edged toward them, heart hammering in my ears. My voice came out barely audible. "Hello?" A soft voice answered from the other side of the glass. "Miss Bennett." I staggered back. The voice wasn't quite right. It sounded like me, my tone, my rhythm, just slightly off, delayed, like someone repeating a phrase they'd practiced but hadn't mastered. My knees buckled as I reached for my phone. I dialed Ranger Cole before I even knew what I was doing. He answered on the second ring, voice tense. "Bennett, are you okay?" "No," I whispered. "Did you hear anything after we left today? Anything strange?" A long pause. I could hear him breathing. "You need to listen to me," he said quietly. "This is going to sound insane, but don't respond to it. Don't mimic it. Don't talk back. We think whatever's in those woods it learns. It imitates. It follows patterns." My knees pressed into the carpet. It followed us. "It might have," he admitted. 3 hikers called earlier. They said they heard someone crying in the trees behind their homes. All 3 live miles apart. Another knock rattled the window. This time faster. Impatient. "Cole," I whispered. "It's outside." "Don't look," he urged. "Stay away from the windows. It may only mimic what it's heard. If you give it new sounds, new reactions, it'll use them." The tapping stopped. Silence. Then, tap, 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 on my bathroom door. Inside my apartment. I dropped the phone. The sound echoed through the room, vibrating through my spine. Each tap was deliberate, evenly spaced, like knuckles rapping wood but not quite in the right rhythm. Too slow. Too thoughtful. "Miss Bennett," the voice crooned again, softer now. "Closer. Help me." My breath hitched. The air felt thick enough to choke on. I tried to move, but fear locked me in place. The bathroom door creaked open by an inch. Then another. I stepped backward until my calves hit the couch. The shadows in the hallway deepened, stretching unnaturally along the floor, bending around corners like something reshaping itself to fit the space. A hand emerged first. Thin, too many joints, fingers like bent branches. It curled around the doorframe with delicate precision, as if testing how human movement worked. The rest of the shape followed slowly, folding itself forward, limbs bending in experimental ways. Its head tilted, jerking once, twice, like it was trying to match the angle of mine. Then, it spoke again. Only this time, it used Lily's voice. "Miss Bennett, we're lost." A second voice overlapped, Emma's. Then another, and another, layered voices of my students, blending like a chorus that didn't understand how to harmonize. All of them delayed by half a second. All slightly wrong. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop myself from answering. If I spoke, it would learn that too. The thing in the doorway moved closer, its limbs scraping along the wall in soft, almost curious strokes. Its shadow elongated behind it, flickering like a flame struggling for form. The smell hit me, then earthy, damp, like rotting leaves and cold stone. It stopped 3 feet from me. Then it lifted its head. And it smiled. My smile. The same one drawn in the crayon sketch. Almost perfect. It whispered, testing the phrase as though savoring it. Without warning, It collapsed inward, its limbs folding tight, its body contracting like an insect preparing to leap. I braced for impact, a scream clawing its way up my throat. But it didn't attack. It turned and skittered back down the hall like a shadow dragged by a thread. The apartment fell silent. The air warmed slightly. The shadows returned to their ordinary shapes. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours. When I finally gathered the courage to step forward and look into the hallway, the bathroom was empty. The window was locked. The walls were still. But the drawing on the table had changed again. Every figure was now crossed out, except one, mine. And beneath it, in neater handwriting, "Not done learning." I don't know if it ever left the apartment. Some nights, when the wind cuts across the roof just right, I hear faint giggling above me. Always a beat late. Always practicing. I knew something was wrong the first night I saw the caretaker standing in that vacant driveway, staring at my house as if he already knew what my bedroom looked like in the dark. My name is Lena. I'm 31, and I'd only been living on Oak Ridge Drive in Cincinnati for 6 quiet months. I had moved there after a breakup that gutted me more than I liked to admit. A new town, a new street, a tiny fixer-upper with too many creaks and too much empty space. Those were supposed to help me rebuild myself. The house across the street had sat vacant the whole time. Overgrown shrubs, faded shutters, a mailbox leaning like a bad hip. Then one chilly afternoon in November, a white sedan pulled up and an elderly man stepped out. Thin shoulders, stooped posture, watery gray eyes. He waved at me even though I hadn't left my porch yet. "I'm Mr. Crowley, the caretaker," he called out in a surprisingly bright voice. "You must be Lena." I froze. I'd never told him my name. But neighbors gossip. Maybe that was it. Maybe. I forced a small smile. "Hi. You moving in?" He shook his head. "Just keeping the place safe." His smile stretched too long. Vacancies attract noises, unwanted guests. Sometimes the walls remember footsteps, you know? I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I didn't. He lingered another beat, long enough that my skin prickled, then shuffled back into the house across the street. For the next few weeks, I tried to pretend he was just eccentric. Every neighborhood has one. But I'd catch him staring across at me from his front window, still as a mannequin. Or see him standing in the yard at night, hands clasped behind him, head tilted up at my attic window like he was listening. Once, when I was bringing in groceries, he wandered over holding a rusted kitchen knife, just scraping paint. He said cheerfully before I even asked, "Can't be too careful about what gets in." "What gets in?" I repeated, because something in me needed him to say it out loud. He tapped the side of his nose. "Pipes carry more than water." I went inside and locked the door. That night the house felt colder than usual. The wind pushed against the siding like it wanted in. I fell asleep on the couch with the TV low, but something pulled me awake around 2 a.m., a soft, papery whispering coming from directly overhead. Not pipes, not raccoons. Words, muffled, indistinct, but undeniably human sounds. I sat up, heart hammering. My attic wasn't finished. I'd barely opened the hatch since moving in. The idea of someone being up there didn't make sense. Yet the whispering stayed, rising and falling like hushed arguments. I didn't go check. I couldn't. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping the blanket like a child. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, old houses lie. But as I left for work, Mr. Crowley shuffled across his yard, waving. "You sleep light, don't you?" he asked softly, almost tender. "You breathe like a girl who's trying not to wake something." I didn't answer. I got in my car and left without looking back. He got worse after that. At 3:11 a.m., 2 nights later, my phone pinged. Motion-detected porch camera. When I opened the live feed, Mr. Crowley was standing at my door, just inches from the lens, staring into it with those wet gray eyes. His lips moved, whispering something too quietly for the microphone to capture. He didn't knock. He didn't try the handle. He just watched. And I watched him. When he finally shuffled out of frame, I sat awake until sunrise again. I confronted him that afternoon. "You came to my door last night." He blinked slowly, smiled gently. "I was only making sure nothing followed you home from the walls. You sleep so peacefully, dear, like a child." Something in me trembled. Not fear exactly, something deeper. A primal recognition that I was alone on that street with a man who was no longer living in the same reality as the rest of us. That evening I checked the attic hatch in my bedroom closet. The ladder creaked as I pulled myself up, and dust drifted in soft, choking clouds. I expected nothing. I wanted nothing. Instead, I found fingerprints, long smudged streaks lining the wooden frame. Too large to be mine. And in the far corner, behind an old trunk left by the previous owner, sat a shoebox. Inside were Polaroids. Dozens. All of me sleeping. Different nights, different angles. My hair in a ponytail one night, loose another. The glow of different Netflix screens on my face. A blanket pulled up to my shoulder. A hand, his hand resting on the edge of the hatch in one photo, just barely in frame, as if he hadn't pulled back fast enough. A chemical smell clung to the photos. Fresh. Too fresh. I dropped the box and backed down the ladder so fast I scraped my arm on a nail. My breath wouldn't steady. My vision tightened. My mind spun between explanations that all felt impossible. I called the police. They sent an officer who walked through my house with the kind of detached politeness that made me want to scream. He checked the attic, nodded at the box like it was nothing, and said, "Could be the previous owner." Hard to say. The previous owner didn't take pictures of me. He shrugged. "No signs of forced entry. Keep the cameras updated. Lock your windows." That was it. I didn't sleep at all that night. The whispering didn't return. But something worse did, the feeling that someone had been inside so many times that they knew the rhythms of my breathing, the cracks in my floor, the moments I slept deeply enough to not hear the hatch shift open. By dawn, I had made my decision. I was moving out. I didn't care about the lease or the deposit or how stupid it made me feel to run. I packed what I could, shoved everything into my car, and drove until the houses turned into apartment buildings, and the air felt different. I found a unit on the 3rd floor of a newer building. Keypad entry, no attic, no crawl spaces, no Mr. Crowley. I slept the first night like the dead. The first sign something was wrong in the new apartment came 3 days after moving in. I was brushing my teeth before bed when I heard a faint, rhythmic, tapping, delicate, deliberate, coming from the ceiling above the bathroom. The ceiling that was supposed to lead into nothing. I stood still, toothbrush in hand, foam gathering at the corners of my mouth. Tap, pause, tap, tap, longer pause, tap, not pipes, not the apartment above me because I lived on the top floor. I turned off the faucet. The tapping instantly stopped. I rinsed my mouth, shut the light, and walked quietly to my bedroom, listening. The silence felt heavy, stretched too tight. I crawled into bed but left the lamp on. Light made the room feel smaller, manageable, controllable. Darkness felt like permission. Sometime after 2 a.m., I drifted into a half-sleep until a soft creak broke through the quiet. The sound of wood bending under weight. In a building made of steel and drywall. My eyes snapped open. The sound creaked again. Higher up this time, above my room, directly above my bed. I stared at the white ceiling as a slow dread crawled over my skin. The ceiling didn't move, but the air beneath it felt colder, as if something had settled just out of sight. I whispered to myself, "There's no attic." But the fear that rose in my throat said otherwise. By morning I had convinced myself it was ventilation, expansion, anything rational. Humans are gifted at inventing softer explanations. That night, the tapping returned. This time, I tapped back. Just once. A stupid, impulsive challenge. The answering tap came immediately. I flinched backward like I'd been slapped. I slept on the couch. The next day at work, graphic design for a small marketing firm. I couldn't focus. Every sound startled me. Every coworker's casual conversation felt too loud, too bright, too normal. I kept checking my phone, checking the porch camera saved to the cloud from the old house, checking the new apartment app that monitored entry logs. Nothing. 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 But emptiness isn't comforting when someone has already proven they can fill your life without leaving a trace. That evening, a storm rolled through. Wind pressed against the windows like a giant mouth breathing. Rain slapped the glass hard enough to sound like fingers. I tried watching TV, then reading, then pacing. Nothing helped. At 1:47 a.m., a sound woke me. Not tapping, not creaking. A voice, soft, almost tender, muffled by distance and architecture, but unmistakably real. Checking the pipes, dear. You still sleep so peacefully? Huh? My body locked. My breath died in my chest. My pulse thundered in my ears. No, no, no. I sat up on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling above the hallway. The voice drifted again, closer, as if sliding along the hidden pathways of the building. Peaceful as ever. I whispered, "This building has no attic." But some part of me already knew that architecture doesn't stop a man like him. Old houses shared tunnels, new ones shared ducts, access panels, maintenance shafts. Maybe he had followed me the entire time. Maybe the photos were never the end but the beginning. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. But I didn't press the call button. What would I say? A voice in the ceiling? A man who somehow traveled through structures? A caretaker who smiled too long and knew how I breathed? They would send someone. They would find nothing, just like before. The voice came again, now directly above my living room. Don't worry. I kept the tunnel narrow so only one of us can fit at a time. Tears blurred my vision. He was in the building, in the ceiling, in the walls. I backed into the corner of the room, gripping my phone like a lifeline. "Please leave me alone," I whispered before I could stop myself. Silence. Then something scraped above the wall, a dragging sound, nails or fabric. A slow descent. The maintenance panel in the hallway ceiling shifted. Just a fraction, but enough. Enough to see a pale, trembling hand curl around the edge. Enough to hear his soft inhale, the way someone might breathe in the scent of a familiar child. "Found you," I screamed. Not loud enough. Nothing is ever loud enough. I bolted for the door, tore it open, sprinted barefoot into the hallway, pounding on neighbors' doors, sobbing that someone was in my ceiling. Someone had followed me. Lights turned on, doors cracked open, concerned faces emerged. Someone called security. Someone called the police. Within minutes, half a dozen people stood in my doorway, staring up at the unmoved panel, the perfectly silent ceiling, the untouched drywall. No scratches. No handprint. No dust displaced. No evidence. Again. The officers were kind but unconvinced. They did a walkthrough, checked everything, found nothing. Suggested stress, displacement, trauma, sleep deprivation. Maybe all of it was true. Maybe none of it was. I moved again a week later. A new building, 4th floor. No attic, no shared vents, concrete ceilings. I sleep with earplugs now, a fan running, a white noise machine. Anything to erase the tiny sounds that might still be real. But last night, at 3:08 a.m., I woke to a soft creak overhead. A creak I shouldn't have heard. And then, a gentle, familiar voice, drifting down through solid concrete. "Checking the pipes, dear. You still sleep so peacefully." I was 11 the first time I understood that some fears never fade. They only grow, twist, and fester, hiding in the cracks where you least expect them. It started as any typical school trip. Excitement in the air, a group of us kids ready to explore the outdoors, escape from the classroom, feel the cool breeze against our skin as we hiked through the woods. Our group, part of a youth hiking program, was supposed to connect with nature, see the world through new eyes. The trail was narrow, winding through thick trees that were just beginning to shed their summer leaves, their dark trunks standing like silent sentinels as the scent of pine and wet earth filled the air. I was walking behind the rest of the group, chatting with my best friend Jenna, when we stumbled upon something unexpected, an old restroom tucked off the side of the trail, barely visible through the underbrush. At first I thought it was just a maintenance shed, but as we drew closer I could see it clearly, its roof sagging, paint peeling off the walls, leaving the building looking like something out of a forgotten storybook. It wasn't part of the trail, not really, just an abandoned structure that didn't belong. But curiosity, as it often does, took hold. "Does anyone even use this?" Jenna asked, squinting at the building. "Doubt it," I replied, stepping closer, my sneakers crunching against the dry leaves on the ground. Something about the place felt wrong, though. The air around it felt stagnant, like the building had been holding its breath for too long, waiting to be discovered. The woods around it seemed quieter, the usual sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds muffled by the oppressive silence that surrounded the building. "Let's check it out," I suggested. Jenna hesitated for a second, but followed anyway. There was no one else around, and for a moment it felt like we were the only ones in the world. The door creaked when I pushed it open, the sound loud and sharp, as if it had been waiting to be heard. The interior of the restroom was worse than I expected, dark, damp, and reeking of mildew. There was something else too, something metallic in the air that made my stomach twist. The walls were covered in grime, and the floor was wet and sticky beneath my shoes. It wasn't a place I'd ever want to be trapped in. I stepped in, glancing around. The dim light that filtered through the cracked windows cast everything in a dull, sickly glow. The scent of rot hung heavy in the air, making my eyes water. My stomach churned, and I immediately regretted stepping inside. "Ugh," Jenna murmured, covering her nose with her sleeve. "This place is disgusting." I nodded, already moving toward the exit. But then Jenna gasped. I turned to see her standing in front of one of the stalls, her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Jenna, what is it?" I asked, my voice trembling with unease. She didn't answer right away. She just pointed toward the farthest stall, and when I looked, my blood ran cold. There, slumped against the wall of the stall, was a body. I froze. For a moment, my mind refused to comprehend what I was seeing. I thought maybe it was a prank, maybe some kind of mannequin or a Halloween decoration that had been left behind. But as I stepped closer, the reality of it hit me. The body was real, and it was rotting. The flesh had begun to decompose, the skin a sickly shade of gray with patches of green that indicated how long it had been left there. The face was unrecognizable, distorted with decay. The eyes were open but lifeless, empty. The stench of death filled my nose, overpowering everything else. My stomach lurched, and I felt bile rise in my throat. "Oh my God," Jenna whispered, her voice shaking. I wanted to scream, to run out of there, but my body was frozen, rooted to the spot. I couldn't take my eyes off the body. I couldn't make sense of it, and then the door slammed shut. The noise was so loud it was as though the world had just collided with itself. The sharp crack of it echoed through the space, bouncing off the walls, reverberating through my skull. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. "Jenna!" I yelled, pulling on the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. It was locked from the outside. Panic rose in my throat. I banged on the door, shouting for help, but the sounds of my voice felt muffled, swallowed up by the thick air in the room. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. My chest tightened. I tried the door again, pushing with all my strength, but nothing. It was hopeless. I could hear Jenna crying softly, her body trembling beside me. Her voice was muffled by the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I could feel the cold sweat running down my back. My breath came in shallow gasps, and all I could think was, "I need to get out of here. We need to get out of here." The faint sound of water dripping echoed through the silence. Drip, drip, drip. It was the only sound in the room, and it was driving me mad. I looked at the body again, my mind refusing to understand what I was seeing. And then I heard it, something scuttling across the floor in the far corner. A sound too soft to be footsteps, but unmistakable. Something was moving in the shadows. I didn't want to look. I couldn't, but my eyes betrayed me. My gaze flicked to the corner of the room, and for a moment I thought I saw something. A shadow, a shape. Then the door clicked. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't want to know what was happening. But the door creaked open slowly, and a sheriff stepped inside. His uniform was damp from the rain, and his eyes were grim, as if he had seen far worse than this before. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at us, then to the body, then back to us. Without a word, he motioned for us to follow him. I remember feeling numb as we walked out of the restroom, stepping out into the cool air. The shock hadn't quite worn off, but the moment I left that room, I knew things would never be the same. I didn't sleep much that night, or the next, or the nights after that. The sheriff told us that the body we found was of a missing person, but I didn't know who. I didn't want to know. The mystery was too much, too terrifying. The feeling that I'd been exposed to something I shouldn't have known still weighed on me. The weeks passed and things slowly returned to normal, or so it seemed. But that feeling, that creeping unease, never left me. I couldn't shake the memory of the bathroom, of the body, of the shadow that had moved in the corner. A year later, I found myself back in that area again, for reasons I couldn't explain to anyone, least of all myself. The trip felt like a compulsion, something I had to do. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself from driving back to the place where it all happened. I parked at the edge of Birchwood Street and walked down the familiar path that led to the woods. The trees still stood tall, their branches swaying in the breeze. But when I got to the spot where the restroom once stood, my stomach dropped. There was nothing left, nothing but a patch of dirt. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of sick joke, but as I walked closer, my heart stopped. A tree, half buried under weeds, stood where the restroom once did. The bark was scarred, the tree's trunk marred by words sprayed in black paint. "He's still here." I froze. My body went numb. The words were clear, etched into the wood like a warning. The same words I'd heard in my head since that day. The same words that had been haunting me, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for me to return. I didn't stay long after that. I couldn't. I turned and left, but the fear followed me like a shadow heavy in my chest. It's been years, and I still hear it, the echo of those words. He's still here, and no matter how far I run, no matter how many years pass, I know the truth now. The past doesn't stay buried. It waits. It waits for the moment you least expect it, and when it comes, you're never ready. It wasn't the flowers that did it. It was the way he looked at me, like I was the most perfect thing he'd ever seen. I thought it was romantic at first, but now I know better. Ryan Hale had a way of making you feel like you were everything he wanted, and then slowly, quietly, he showed you what he wanted you to be. I'm Lena Porter, 25 years old, and I'll never forget the day I met him. The way his smile caught my attention from across the cafe, how his laugh seemed so genuine, so effortless. There was something magnetic about Ryan that day. He was just a florist owning a small flower shop downtown. But he had this charm, this warm energy that made everyone around him feel like they were the center of his world. I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. Our first dates were everything I had dreamed of. Slow walks through the park, quiet dinners at dimly lit restaurants, long conversations about life and dreams. He was easy to talk to, always asking about my day, always listening with such intensity like my every word mattered. I told myself I had found the one, the man who saw the real me, who understood me in a way that no one ever had. He made me feel special, important. It was intoxicating. He showered me with flowers, always bringing roses, lilies, and tulips to my apartment. At first I thought it was sweet, the kind of gesture any loving partner would make. He said the flowers represented me. Perfect, beautiful, just like the blooms, he would say. But beauty, as I would learn, isn't always a gift. It can be a curse. One night everything shifted. We were in his shop, a quaint little place with bright windows and a sweet floral scent that always made me feel at home. I loved the shop, loved how it felt like a refuge from the world. But that day Ryan was off. He was handling the flowers more roughly than usual, his face tense, his jaw clenched. "Ryan, are you all right?" I asked, my voice soft, but he didn't respond right away. He was holding a bunch of tulips, beautiful, vibrant tulips that had started to wilt under the hot lights. Ryan's fingers gripped the stems a little too tightly, and before I could say anything, he threw them down onto the counter, his face contorting in frustration. "They're ugly," he spat, as if the flowers had betrayed him. "So ugly," he repeated as though the word itself was poison. "Ryan, stop," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's wrong with them?" He looked up at me, eyes wide, something dark flickering in them. "They're ruining everything. Ruining the arrangement. You wouldn't understand. The word sent a chill down my spine. I tried to laugh it off, but the tension in the air thickened and I felt the weight of his anger pressing down on me, suffocating. His hands trembled as he moved to grab more flowers, as though the entire world depended on these little blooms being perfect. I tried to shrug it off, but the unease lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. In the days that followed, the cracks began to show. Ryan's obsession with perfection, with beauty, started to grow more pronounced. His compliments became laced with undertones of control. "You'd look even better without all that makeup, Lena," he'd say, his voice sweet but edged with something else. "You don't need to hide behind it." I laughed it off, but the smile never reached my eyes. His words stuck with me, like the scent of flowers that clung to my clothes. His need for me to be perfect, for me to be beautiful, his way became suffocating. His texts began to get more frequent, more demanding. "Where are you? Why didn't you respond? You shouldn't wear that dress. It makes you look too casual." I felt myself shrinking. Every day it became harder to breathe, to be myself. Ryan didn't see me for who I was anymore. He saw a canvas, a blank slate for his own idea of beauty, and it wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough, but I convinced myself it was love. That's what he told me, right? That this was what love looked like. Wanting the best for me, wanting to shape me into the person I was meant to be. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. And then came the day everything changed. The day I realized who Ryan truly was. We were at his apartment that night, the soft glow of candles casting shadows on the walls. He was sitting across from me, his eyes dark and focused like he was studying me. There was something in the way he looked at me that made my skin crawl. A strange hunger in his gaze. I felt it before he even spoke. "Lena," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "I think it's time we take things to the next level." I froze, unsure of where he was going. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, he leaned in, his hand brushing my arm. "You know, we've been through so much together. I think it's time you realize just how much I care about you. I want to help you be perfect. I want to fix you, Lena. Make you the best version of yourself, the way you're meant to be." I pulled away, my heart racing, the unease settling deep in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, panic bubbling in my chest. "You don't see it yet, but you will," he said, his eyes wild like a man obsessed. "You'll understand once you stop hiding from yourself." The room seemed to shrink around me. The air felt thick, suffocating, and I couldn't breathe. I tried to stand, but before I could, Ryan grabbed me. His hand was cold and forceful, pulling me back toward him. "You can't leave," he growled, his voice harsh. "I won't let you go." "Ryan, stop!" I cried, struggling against him, but he was too strong. The room spun as his grip tightened around my arm. I tried to break free, but my body felt like lead. That's when I saw it. The knife. I don't know how I saw it, but I did. It was on the counter, the sharp edge catching the light. My heart stopped, my mind raced. I had to get away. I had to survive. With a surge of strength I didn't know I had, I pulled away from him, darting toward the knife. Ryan screamed at me, but I didn't stop. I grabbed it, my hand trembling, and with everything I had, I plunged it into his side. The shock on his face as the blood poured from him was the last thing I saw before I ran. I don't remember much after that night. The sirens, the police, my friends. It was all a blur of questions, of faces, of disbelief. I was in shock, numb, trying to process what had happened. I thought I was free. I thought I'd escaped. But that was the thing about Ryan, he never really left. He was there in every corner of my mind, in every flower, in every fleeting thought. And then the news came. 2 years later, after everything, I heard his name again. Ryan had been released early for good behavior. The police said he was rehabilitated. He was getting a second chance. I knew better. I was right to be afraid. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was safe. I thought I was free. But then I learned the truth. He had murdered again. His new girlfriend, Elise, had been the same as me. Perfect. And Ryan had killed her because she faded. She had stopped being perfect in his eyes. My world shattered again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear everything apart. But instead I just sat there frozen. I could still hear his voice in my head, still feel his hands around my throat, still see his eyes. Wild, obsessed, terrifying. And I wondered, when would he come for me next? The nightmare doesn't end when you escape. It follows you, lurks in the shadows, waiting for the moment you forget, waiting for the moment you feel safe again. But I'll never forget. I'll never let myself. It's funny how you think you've learned to live with something, only for it to come back and prove you wrong. I thought I'd buried my past with Randy, buried it deep enough that I could live my life without looking back. But even after all these years, there are moments when I still hear the truck, that familiar rumbling engine. I smell his cigarette smoke in the air. And then I remember everything. I was just a kid when Randy came into our lives, only 10, naive and unaware of what it meant to have your world upended by someone you never asked for. My mom wasn't looking for love when she met him. She had just recently been left by my father, who took nothing but his memories and a cloud of regret. So when Randy came along with his easy smile and charming words, she clung to him, desperate for something to hold on to. He was everything she needed at the time, a man who seemed strong and dependable, who could promise her things that she wanted to hear. But promises like that are fragile, easily broken by a single bottle of whiskey. It started slow, the cracks in his facade, small things, his late-night drinking sessions, the way he would slur his words when he talked to her, the way he'd disappear for hours only to return smelling of alcohol and cigarettes. But at first, I didn't see it. I was just a kid. I didn't understand how a man could destroy the house you thought was safe, the house that had always been a place of warmth. But even then, I could feel something shifting. I remember the first time Randy hit her. I was sitting in the living room watching a movie when I heard it. The slap, the sickening sound of skin meeting skin, and then my mom's startled gasp. I froze, unable to move. I stayed hidden behind the couch, my heart hammering in my chest, my hands pressed against my ears to block out the sound. But I couldn't block it out. I couldn't stop the way the fear started crawling through my veins, growing darker with each passing minute. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help her. I was just a kid, but she didn't leave him. She didn't even fight back, not really. Instead, she stood there, her hand pressed to her cheek, tears in her eyes, but she never said anything. Not a word. She never told him to stop. She never told him to leave, and me? I was too scared to speak, too scared to move. It wasn't just the slaps. It was the other things. How he'd steal from us when he couldn't get what he wanted. How he'd threaten us with words that felt like chains wrapping around our throats and keeping us quiet. I saw how Mom shrank away from him, how she started to hide her smiles and her laughter, how she tried to be invisible when he was around, like the air was too thick to breathe. And then there was Laya. She was only 5 when Randy came into our lives, too young to understand what was happening, but not too young to feel the weight of it. I remember how she'd curl up on the couch when she heard the truck pull into the driveway, how she'd look at the door, her small hands clutching the edge of the couch, waiting. She could sense the change before it even happened, before Randy's footsteps made their way into the house, before the tension began to rise. She was so young, but even she knew to be afraid. I tried to protect her even when I didn't know how. But we were both just kids, trying to figure out how to survive in a house that no longer felt safe. That night, it all came to a head. I was in the kitchen trying to distract myself with homework when I heard it, the sound of Randy's fist meeting Mom's face. That sickening thud. I didn't have to look. I knew what it was. I didn't even have to see the blood or the bruises. I could feel the terror seeping through the walls like it was creeping into my skin. Mom shouted, "Get out! You're not welcome here anymore." I couldn't breathe. It felt like the world stopped for a moment. I looked at Laya, who was sitting on the couch, her eyes wide, her small hands trembling. I grabbed her and pulled her into my arms, not knowing what else to do. That was the night Randy left. For good, we thought. For good, at least for that time. He grabbed his things and walked out the door, leaving behind nothing but anger and broken promises. But the relief didn't last. The phone calls started the very next day. His voice, low and guttural, would leave messages on the machine, threatening us, making us feel like we had done something wrong. He would tell us how much he hated us, how much he would make us pay for rejecting him. He was relentless, his anger festering in every word, every sound that came from the phone. My mom, she tried to get on with things. She tried to pretend that everything was normal. She smiled, she laughed, she tried to rebuild her life, but the fear was always there, lurking. It never went away. But that night, the night she brought home the Apple Watch, that was when I knew. That was when I knew she was still holding on to something that wasn't worth holding on to. Laya had been sitting in the living room, coloring. She looked up at Mom with wide eyes when she came in holding the watch in her hand. "Is that for me, Mom?" she asked, her voice soft, hesitant. Mom smiled. "No, sweetheart. It's for me. Something to remind me that I'm still allowed to hope." But I saw it. The way she looked at that watch, like it was the only thing keeping her from breaking. It wasn't hope. It was a distraction. It was a way to hold on to something that wasn't real. I could see it then. Randy's shadow still hung over us even though he wasn't here anymore. I hate that I can still hear it. The engine. It's the sound that follows me, that haunts me in my dreams, that keeps me awake at night. The sound of Randy's truck. Even though he's long gone, even though we've moved on with our lives, I can still hear it. The hum of the engine, the way it revs as it approaches. I hear it when I'm walking down the street, when I'm sitting at home alone, and sometimes even when I'm in bed, trying to sleep. I've learned to ignore it, to pretend it's not there, but there are nights when I can't. There are nights when the sound is so real, so close that I swear it's happening all over again. I can feel the weight of it pressing down on me like the air itself is thick with it. Laya is 15 now. She's grown up in the shadow of everything Randy left behind. She's stronger than I was. She hides it better too. She talks about school, her friends, boys. She laughs, she plays, and sometimes I forget. I forget that she's still carrying it all. But then I'll see the way she jumps when a truck's engine roars to life. The way she locks the doors a little faster. The way she holds her breath when a knock comes at the door. I see it in her eyes, the same fear that never really leaves. It's been years, but the fear hasn't gone away. And me? I try to pretend it's fine. I try to pretend that Randy is just a ghost in the past, that his shadow isn't still there, lurking. But I know it's there. It's in the way I lock the doors 3 times before I sleep. It's in the way I flinch when I hear footsteps outside, the way I check my rearview mirror when I'm driving. I've tried to move on. We all have. But it's not that simple, because there are things you can't escape. Memories you can't erase. Randy's shadow will always be with us. I see it in every streetlight, every truck that passes, every shadow that flickers on the walls. I hear it in the quiet moments, in the silence that fills the spaces between breaths. I hear it in the whispers of the past, the echo of a life that I'll never fully escape. We've tried to rebuild, but I know better now. I know that the past doesn't go away. It waits, it hides. It follows you like a shadow you can never outrun. And for as long as I live, Randy's shadow will be right behind me. The first thing I noticed was the truck. It was parked at the end of Birchwood Street, where the sidewalk curves just beyond the bend. A faded blue thing covered in rust, like it had been sitting there for ages. The headlights were dim, the engine off, but something about it felt wrong. It wasn't supposed to be there, not tonight. But then again, what was? I had just walked out of Jenna's house, the air cooler than it had been earlier, and the sky was thick with the kind of gray clouds that make you feel like the night has already come, even though the sun's barely set. I wasn't really paying attention, distracted by my thoughts. Jenna had been talking about prom, and I'd just nodded along, pretending to care, but something nagged at the back of my mind. That was when I saw it, the truck. It was like a shadow creeping at the corner of my vision, the presence of something that shouldn't be there. The street was quiet, like it always was. Too quiet. There's a certain peace in small towns, a predictability that lulls you into a false sense of safety. Birchwood Street was where I had spent my whole life, where I knew everyone's face and where nothing bad ever happened. But tonight, that feeling of safety felt like a lie. I took a few steps forward, my sneakers scuffing against the pavement. The truck sat there like an unwanted guest, its faded color blending with the shadows. My stomach tightened, but I shook it off. It was probably just some guy parked for a while, waiting for someone, or maybe someone just passing through. There wasn't anything unusual about it. Then I noticed her, Riley. She was a few steps ahead of me, weaving unsteadily as she walked, holding a half-empty bottle of something in her hand. I could see the way her movements were exaggerated, almost comically so, like she was trying to stay upright on legs that didn't want to cooperate. A soft, slurred laugh escaped her lips as she swayed toward me. "Whoa, sorry about that," she said, bumping into me as she stumbled. Her breath was warm against my face, carrying a sharp, bitter scent. The bottle she was holding was glass, dark and unmarked, but I knew it was alcohol. Guess I'm not as steady on my feet as I thought. No worries, I said, trying to ignore the unease rising in my stomach. She had been one of those girls I'd hung out with a few times at parties. Loud, fun, but not someone I really spent much time with. But tonight she seemed different. Off. Are you okay? I asked, frowning as I noticed her eyes were glazed, not quite focused. Yeah, just a little tipsy. Name's Riley, she said, giving me a grin that was too wide, too forced. Something about her felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I smiled back, not wanting to be rude, but there was a knot tightening in my stomach. The unease in me grew stronger, a little voice in my head whispering that something wasn't right. We exchanged numbers, and after a few awkward moments, we parted ways. I should have walked away right then, but instead, I found myself continuing down the street, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the truck following behind me, but the street was empty, except for the figure at the end of the block. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the dim light, the shadows playing tricks on me, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. There was someone there standing still, hidden in the dark. My heart skipped in my chest, my feet slowing as I tried to focus on the shape in the distance. The figure didn't move, didn't even twitch. It was just standing there, staring, watching. I couldn't make out any details from this far away, but I knew something was off. The streetlights flickered above me, casting long, distorted shadows on the sidewalk. The figure remained where it was, unmoving, like a silhouette burned into my vision. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, my pulse quickening. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just someone waiting for someone else, maybe lost in thought. But the unease settled deeper in my bones. I walked faster, my footsteps echoing against the empty street. And that's when I saw it. The truck. It was there, parked at the same spot, its headlights now flickering as though they were waiting for something. Or someone. My heart dropped into my stomach. I was being followed. I didn't know how I knew, but I felt it in my chest. The tension in the air. The feeling of being watched. I turned quickly, trying to focus on something else. But that's when I heard it. A scream. The sound cut through the air like a knife. Riley. It was Riley. I turned in time to see her being dragged toward the figure in the shadows. No, I screamed, but my voice barely escaped my throat. The figure moved too fast. A flash of metal glinted in the dim light. The knife. Riley screamed again, but her voice was cut off as the blade drove into her side. My body surged forward before I could think. I didn't even know what I was doing. I just acted. I lunged at the man, grabbing his arm with every ounce of strength I had, twisting it to force him to drop the blade. The metal clattered to the ground, but I wasn't looking at it. I was looking at Riley, her body limp, her eyes wide with shock. Blood stained her shirt, dark and spreading quickly. "Run!" I shouted, even though I wasn't sure if she could hear me. I grabbed her arm, pulling her along as I tried to get us away from the man, but he wasn't done. I could hear his footsteps behind me, his breathing shallow, ragged. He wasn't giving up. He wasn't going to stop. Just as I turned the corner, the sirens finally screamed in the distance. My legs burned, my body screamed for rest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The sound of the man's footsteps grew fainter, but I didn't dare look back. I pulled Riley toward the gas station on the corner, my heart still pounding in my chest. The clerk saw us and immediately called the police. The rest was a blur. Riley was rushed to the hospital. I was shaken, standing in front of the gas station, my hands trembling. I don't remember much of what happened next. The police, the questions, the officers asking me to recount the details. But the worst part wasn't the knife, or the blood, or the fear. The worst part was the emptiness that settled over me afterward. I didn't feel relief, not yet, because something was still out there watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. The police did what they could, of course. They asked questions, took statements, and assured me that they'd find the man who attacked us. They told me not to worry, that everything would be fine. But the problem with that? Everything wasn't fine. I had watched him. Watched that knife glint in the moonlight, heard Riley scream, felt her blood on my hands as I pulled her away. There was no escaping it. No matter how much the officers tried to reassure me, the truth settled like a stone in my stomach. He was still out there. And the worst part? The fear didn't fade. For days I stayed home waiting for some sign that everything was going to return to normal. But each time I stepped outside, the world felt too big, too loud, too unfamiliar. I couldn't walk down Birchwood Street without feeling like the shadows were following me, like I was being watched. It was late one night when I noticed the truck again. The same faded blue one, parked exactly where it had been the night Riley was attacked. I couldn't believe it. It couldn't be the same truck, could it? I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. The headlights flickered once, twice. A cold, sick feeling settled in my chest. I stepped back, the chill creeping up my spine, my skin prickling. The shadows under the trees seemed deeper now, the streetlights harsher. I turned around and walked faster, my feet slapping against the pavement as my mind raced. It couldn't be him. It just couldn't. I thought about Riley. I thought about what happened that night, her blood staining my hands as I tried to get her to safety. I thought about the way her body went limp in my arms, how I almost lost her. But then the smell hit me. That smell. Cigarette smoke. It hung in the air like a lingering ghost, thick and nauseating, clinging to the back of my throat. I wasn't imagining it. It was there, cutting through the damp night air. I knew that smell. I knew it too well. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the street was empty. I quickened my pace. My breath came faster, my heart racing. I could still feel his eyes on me, even though I couldn't see him. The truck loomed behind me like a dark figure, its presence too palpable, like something waiting to pounce. My legs felt heavy, but I pushed forward, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. The truck stayed behind me just far enough to make me feel paranoid, just close enough to keep me from breathing easy. The smell of smoke lingered like it was in my skin and my clothes. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow at first, deliberate but getting closer. I glanced behind me again, and there it was. The man. The same figure from that night, walking toward me with that same steady pace. His face was obscured by the shadows, but the outline of him was unmistakable. That same tall frame, the same black jacket. My stomach dropped. I froze in place. The world seemed to contract, the noises of the city fading into silence. My heart thudded in my chest as I stood there, paralyzed with fear. Then something changed in the air. The streetlights buzzed above me. The shadows deepened and everything felt wrong. The chill in my spine twisted into something colder, something more terrifying. I was caught. There was no escape. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move, and then I heard his voice. "You remember me, don't you?" My blood turned to ice. I wanted to scream, but my voice was locked in my throat. His face came into view, but it wasn't clear. It was distorted by the streetlights, twisted by the dark. But I knew. I knew who it was. It was him. The man who had attacked Riley. The man who had nearly taken her life. And now he was here. I took a step back, then another, my breath shallow as I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. My fingers were shaking too badly to dial, too panicked to function. He took another step forward. "I just want to talk," he said, his voice too calm, too flat. I backed away again, my mind racing for an escape, for a way to get out of this. But every step I took felt like it was taking me deeper into the nightmare. My legs felt like lead, my thoughts incoherent. And then, just as I was about to turn and run, the sound of sirens filled the air. My pulse surged, my body flooding with relief and terror in equal measure. The police? They had to be here for me. They had to be. The man froze, his eyes darting to the street just for a moment. But it was enough. Enough to make him hesitate, to make him look over his shoulder at the approaching lights. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, my legs finally moving, pumping as fast as they could carry me. The air burned in my lungs, but I didn't care. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not until I was safe. I didn't look back. I made it to my house. The door slammed behind me. My heart still racing in my chest as I locked it, bolted it, and pressed my back against the cold wood. But even after the police arrived, even after they asked me questions, reassured me that the man had been caught, the feeling didn't go away. The truck. The smell. The footsteps. I couldn't escape the fear. I couldn't escape him. Days passed. Then weeks. I tried to go on with my life. Tried to go back to normal, but I couldn't. I couldn't let go of the night. The fear. The man who had nearly taken Riley from me. Even though I was supposed to be safe, I knew better now. Safety was a lie, I still see it. The truck. It's not always there, but when it is, I freeze. The fear grips me again like it did that night. I see his face in the shadows, feel the chill in my spine. I still walk down Birchwood Street, still past the place where Riley was attacked, but now I do it with my eyes wide open. The echoes of that night still following me like a shadow I can't escape, and maybe that's the worst part. The worst part isn't that I'll never forget. It's that I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again. A long time ago, I decided to seek help for my anxiety disorder and depression. I had just ended a 5-year relationship and lost my job in the span of 2 months. This, coupled with my pre-existing mental health struggles, was a perfect recipe for disaster. The overwhelming weight of these losses became unbearable, and I began to experience intrusive suicidal thoughts that loomed over me daily. At that point, I knew I needed professional help as soon as possible. A close friend, seeing my distress, recommended a therapist named Dr. John Rosen. He was known for his unconventional yet reportedly effective methods. At the time, I had no idea what I was walking into. Dr. Rosen wasn't famous then, but he would later become notorious for a controversial technique called confrontation therapy. The premise was simple but intense, directly confronting trauma in a raw, unfiltered manner to expedite emotional recovery. My desperation made me willing to try anything. The first time I stepped into his office, I felt uneasy. The room was dimly lit, with dark wood furniture that seemed to swallow the light. Shelves lined with old books stretched up the walls, their musty scent adding to the oppressive atmosphere. I'd visited other therapists before, and their offices always had a comforting vibe. Dr. Rosen's space felt the opposite, foreboding, almost menacing. Something about it made me want to turn around and leave, but my desperation anchored me to my chair. Dr. Rosen himself was a man in his 50s, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through you. He greeted me with a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't waste time," he said, his voice firm. "If you're serious about getting better, you'll need to trust my methods." He spoke with a confidence that was both reassuring and intimidating. I explained my situation, my voice trembling as I recounted the breakup, the job loss, and the all-encompassing despair that had brought me to his door. He nodded, jotting down notes in a leather-bound notebook. "Your case is promising," he said. "Confrontation therapy will help you. It's not for the faint of heart, but I believe you have what it takes." The first session was intense but not unbearable. He asked probing questions about my childhood, delving into painful memories I had long buried. I told him about my father's explosive temper and the beatings I endured. Dr. Rosen listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. "Pain is a teacher," he said. "We'll confront this pain together." His words were unsettling, but I clung to the hope that he knew what he was doing. Over the next few weeks, the sessions became increasingly grueling. Dr. Rosen's questions grew sharper, his tone more commanding. He pushed me to recount my traumas in excruciating detail, often interrupting to challenge my perceptions. "Are you sure it was abuse?" he asked once, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Or was it discipline?" The question cut deep, but I convinced myself it was part of the process. He'd often repeat, "We must break you down to build you up." One day I arrived at his office to find the door locked. I waited in the hallway, growing increasingly anxious. When he finally let me in, he led me to a room I hadn't seen before. It was stark and dark, with a single chair in the center and a small table against the wall. On the table were several objects I couldn't identify in the dim light. "Today's session will be different," Dr. Rosen said, his tone devoid of warmth. He gestured for me to sit in the chair. Uneasy, I complied. Without warning, he began strapping me to the chair with leather restraints. My heart raced as I asked what he was doing. "Relax," he said. "This is necessary for your progress." Panic surged through me as I struggled against the straps, but they were too tight. "This doesn't feel right," I said, my voice shaking. He ignored me and turned on a tape recorder. We're going to confront your deepest fears today. No more hiding." His voice was calm, almost soothing, but it only heightened my terror. Dr. Rosen began asking me about the most traumatic moments of my life. Each question felt like a dagger, cutting deeper into wounds I thought had healed. When I hesitated or refused to answer, he tightened the straps, causing them to dig painfully into my skin. Then he pulled out a scalpel from the table. My breath hitched as he held it up to the light. "I want you to focus on this," he said. "Feel the pain. Let it connect you to your memories." "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Trust the process," he replied, his icy smile returning. He pressed the blade lightly against my arm, making a shallow cut. The pain was sharp and immediate, jolting me out of my thoughts. I screamed, but he didn't flinch. "Good," he said. "Pain is truth." The session spiraled into a nightmare. He alternated between asking questions and inflicting small cuts, each one more painful than the last. My cries and pleas fell on deaf ears. "You're resisting," he said. "Resistance is a sign of weakness. Do you want to stay weak?" Time lost all meaning as I endured his twisted version of therapy. At one point, he turned off the lights and left the room, leaving me alone in total darkness. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. My mind played tricks on me, conjuring shadows and whispers that weren't there. When he returned, he carried a leather belt. "This will help you reconnect with your past," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He began striking me with the belt, each lash a searing reminder of my father's abuse. As the blows rained down, he recited details of my childhood traumas, details I had shared with him in confidence. His voice was cold and clinical, as if he were narrating a documentary. "Stop," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "Please, stop." He didn't stop. The session only ended when I was too weak to resist, my body and spirit broken. He unstrapped me and said, "You've made progress today. See you next week." I stumbled out of his office, my mind reeling. I knew I had to report him, but fear and shame kept me silent. Over the next few weeks, my anxiety and depression worsened. I became a prisoner in my own home, plagued by nightmares and flashbacks. I stopped seeking therapy, convinced that no one could be trusted. Dr. Rosen's name eventually became synonymous with success in the mental health field. His methods were lauded as groundbreaking, despite a few detractors. I watched from the shadows, unable to reconcile the man the world praised with the monster I had endured. To this day, I live with the scars, both physical and emotional, of my time in his care. Sharing this story is my first step toward healing. Perhaps by telling the truth, I can begin to reclaim the life he nearly destroyed. This happened when I was 20 years old in 1981 in Los Angeles. It was a time of neon signs, buzzing nightlife, and a city alive with energy. Yet for me, the lights felt dim, the music muffled, and the city's pulse seemed to falter in my chest. I was going through one of the most difficult times of my life, trying to mend the pieces of my heart after breaking up with Mila, my girlfriend of 7 years. 7 years. It felt like a lifetime when you're that young, like I'd lost not just a partner but an essential part of myself. The breakup had been mutual, or so we had told ourselves. It was amicable on the surface, but beneath the calm words lay years of unresolved tension. Still, the reality of being apart hit me like a freight train, leaving me lonely and disoriented. We had been on vacation at a luxury hotel when it all fell apart. I thought that getaway would bring us closer, rekindle something we'd lost. Instead, it became the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. And now, I found myself seeking solace in the bar of that very hotel, a place that had once been a refuge but would soon turn into a harrowing memory. That night I sat in the corner of the dimly lit bar, nursing a beer and trying to drown my sorrows. The room was alive with laughter and chatter, couples leaning into each other, friends clinking glasses, and the occasional lone traveler immersed in their own thoughts. but none of it registered with me. I felt invisible, as if the weight of my heartbreak had cast a shadow that no one dared to approach. My mind was trapped in a loop, replaying conversations, arguments, and the final goodbye with Mila. The loneliness was suffocating. It was then that a man approached me. He had a friendly smile, the kind that seemed disarming, and a look in his eyes that suggested he understood what I was going through. "Hi there. You look like you could use some company," he said, his voice warm but tinged with an almost unnatural enthusiasm. At first I was annoyed. I didn't want company. I wanted to wallow in my misery uninterrupted. But something about his demeanor made it hard to brush him off. Maybe it was the alcohol loosening my guard, or maybe it was the sheer desperation to feel like someone cared, even if it was a stranger. "I'm Sandy," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Edward," I replied reluctantly, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but not overbearing, and his smile widened as if he'd just achieved some small victory. Sandy ordered 2 more beers, insisting that I take one. He encouraged me to talk, to vent about whatever was troubling me. At first I hesitated. Who was this guy, and why did he care? But as the conversation flowed, I found myself opening up. I told him about Mila, about how our relationship had unraveled, and how lost I felt without her. He listened intently, nodding at the right moments and offering words of encouragement. "Women can be cruel," he said at one point, his tone almost philosophical. "But sometimes, you just need to forget about it for a while. Problems often work themselves out, you know. If she really loves you, she'll come back." His words were comforting in a way, and I began to feel a strange sense of camaraderie with him. He told me a little about his life, saying he was in town for work and staying at the same hotel. As the night wore on, the bar began to empty, but Sandy and I stayed, drinking and talking. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't drowning in my own thoughts. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first, a nagging feeling at the back of my mind. I noticed the bartender glancing at us occasionally, his expression unreadable but tense. It felt as though he was watching Sandy more than me, his gaze lingering just a second too long. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my own paranoia. "You seem like a good guy, Edward," Sandy said, pouring me another glass of whiskey. "You deserve a break. How about we take this conversation upstairs? My room's just a few floors up. We can keep talking, maybe watch some TV or something." I hesitated. The suggestion felt off, but I was drunk and vulnerable, desperate to escape the melancholy that clung to me like a second skin. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The elevator ride was a blur, and by the time we reached his room, the alcohol had dulled my senses considerably. His room was nearly identical to mine, a standard hotel setup with a king-sized bed, a small sitting area, and a minibar. We sat on the couch, and he handed me another drink. I took it without thinking, grateful for the distraction. But as the conversation continued, I began to feel strange. My vision blurred, and a heavy lethargy settled over me. I tried to stand, but my legs refused to cooperate. Panic began to creep in as I realized something was very wrong. "Just relax," Sandy said, his voice now a distant echo. "Everything will be fine." The next thing I knew, I woke up to searing pain in my head. My wrists and ankles were bound tightly with rough ropes, and I was lying on the bed. Panic surged through me as I struggled against my restraints, the coarse fibers biting into my skin. Sandy stood at the foot of the bed, watching me with a chilling smile. "What are you doing?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a bottle of vodka and began pouring its contents into my mouth. I choked, sputtering as the liquid burned its way down my throat. "Don't worry," he said, his tone almost soothing. "I'm just helping you forget." Then he produced a razor, running the blade lightly over my chest. The sharp pain made me gasp, and blood welled up from the shallow cuts. His expression was one of fascination, as if he were an artist admiring his work. "I've always been fascinated by the human anatomy," he mused. "Each body is a unique map, don't you think? Terror gripped me as his words sank in. This wasn't just a sick joke or a robbery gone wrong. I was at the mercy of a psychopath who took pleasure in inflicting pain. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but my body was weak and unresponsive from the alcohol and blood loss. "You're not the first, you know," Sandy said casually, as if discussing the weather. "But you might be the most interesting. Everyone always has a chance, though. Want to know what yours is?" I tried to speak, to plead for my life, but my voice was barely a whisper. Tears streamed down my face as I thought of Mila, my parents, my friends. Was this how it was all going to end? Suddenly, a loud knock at the door shattered the tense silence. Someone was outside, and Sandy's expression darkened with irritation. The voice of the bartender carried through the door, demanding to know what was going on. My heart leapt with a glimmer of hope. Sandy hesitated, clearly torn between finishing what he'd started and addressing the interruption. The security staff's voices joined in, insisting that he open the door. Panic flashed across his face, and in a desperate move, he grabbed his knife and pressed it against my throat. "Stay quiet," he hissed, his voice laced with menace. But the authorities weren't backing down. Realizing he was cornered, Sandy made a split-second decision. He opened the window and fled down the fire escape, leaving me tied to the bed, bleeding and barely conscious. The security team burst in moments later, followed by the police. I was rushed to the hospital where they treated my injuries and pumped my stomach. Mila, notified by the hotel staff, arrived at the hospital and stayed by my side. Her presence was a lifeline, a reminder that I still had something to live for. Sandy wasn't caught that night, but the police eventually apprehended him months later. He was linked to several similar incidents, a trail of victims who hadn't been as lucky as I was. Despite his arrest, the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. That night taught me a brutal lesson about trust and vulnerability. I'd sought solace in a stranger and found myself on the edge of death. To this day, I'm wary of the kindness of strangers, always questioning their intentions. Because sometimes the people who offer you a hand are the ones who want to drag you down.